Yes, sir. So good afternoon to one and all. I, Pranav Vanikar, on behalf of Maharashtra National Law University, Aurangabad's Center for World Affairs, welcome you to the first guest lecture on the topic Challenges in Countering Terrorist Financing by Ms. Sylvia Laksmi. Before I call upon Sylvia ma'am to speak on this rather intriguing topic, since it is the first lecture that is being organized by this forum, I feel it necessary to give a brief description of the same along with the forum's aims and objectives. The complete name of the forum is Field Marshal Manekshaw Center for World Affairs, and the idea for constituting a center of such a nature was born out of the need felt by a few individuals of our university to initiate conversations regarding matters of international relevance and create a community of fluid, non rigid, yet active international affairs enthusiasts. We do not wish to limit the said conversations to a particular field, but aspire to include and choose topics from varied fields and deliberate upon them. The forum aims at achieving the said goals, firstly, through constant publication of research articles and write-ups on its website by anyone willing to contribute something on a particular field, and secondly, through organizing guest lectures by eminent researchers, scholars, and professors. We also intend to organize symposiums to discuss and debate on relevant contemporary international topics. Now, I would like to thank Honorable Vice Chancellor Sir Mr. KVS Sarma and Registrar Sir Mr. Ashok Warje for their continued and unwavering support. The forum would also like to thank Honorable Vice Chancellor Sir for being a part of this lecture today. And now I would like to request him to give his opening remarks. So,
Okay, thank you for introducing me to the participants here. And first of all, I have to thank my colleague, Mr. Vinay, who is conducting this particular program, that is first lecture on this particular counter financing of terrorism. And in future, he is planning to conduct series of lectures on this topic. And I also thank the first speaker, Miss S. Lakshmi, who is a senior advisor researcher in the Indonesian government since 2007, and presently she is also, I think, a senior researcher in National uh, Australian University. She is also a researcher according to her resume I saw. And today's topic is uh, the topic of the lecture is challenges in countering terrorist financing. Challenges in countering terrorist financing. And what is this terrorism? Terrorism is a forceful and unlawful method to achieve the desired goal and affect almost every sphere of human life, be it economic, political, or social. India has time and again formulated laws to deal with terrorism. Currently, the Unlawful Activities Prevention Act 1967 is the primary anti-terrorism law in force in India. The most recent amendments were made in 2013. That is in 2013, that is the last amendment, which dealt largely with the economic and financial aspects of terrorism. The controversial Armed Forces Special Powers Act 1958 is one such law enacted by Parliament to check insurgency in the Northeast by giving additional powers to the armed forces in areas declared disturbed areas. These provisions were extended to Jammu and Kashmir in 1990 through the enactment of the Armed Forces Jammu and Kashmir Special Powers Act. State legislatures have also enacted laws intended to address organized crime and militancy. These laws include the MCOCA, applicable in Maharashtra and Delhi, the Karnataka Control of Organized Crime Act 2000, and the Chhattisgarh Vishes Jan Suraksha Adhinyam 2005, Chhattisgarh Special Public Safety Act CVJSA. These are some laws in India regulating this terrorism and financing. About financing, we have Money Laundering Act. This particular act is trying to regulate this what you call the financing with reference to terrorism terrorism activities. They these terrorists, they are getting funds in two ways: legal way and illegal way. Legal way means some governments, recognized governments of public international, they are providing finance. For example, most powerful developed countries are also financing the terrorists in some other countries. And these terrorist organizations, they are raising funds through illegal means. That is by way of doing drug selling and all these. If you see Taliban, the terrorist organization itself became what you call the ruling part, what you call the ruling party. Are there is no there are no elections in Taliban as long as Afghanistan, as long as Taliban party or that particular organization continues. So that particular the government itself is doing terrorist activities. So how to control all these things? And on this particular aspect, I think Madam will deliver a lecture on this particular topic. I thank her for giving her consent to deliver a lecture. I thank once again Ms. S. Lakshmi and Mr. Vinay for conducting this particular program. Thank you one and all.
Thank you, sir. Thank you, sir. Thank you.
Thank you so much, sir. Now, before I hand over the mic to Sylvia ma'am, I would like to give a brief introduction about her. She is a subject matter expert in the field of defense and security studies with prime focus on terrorism. Sylvia ma'am also has an experience of working, as VC sir had pointed out, as a researcher and senior advisor to the Indonesian government, researching on specialized areas of financial crimes and intelligence investigations. Furthermore, ma'am has a vast amount of experience in anti-money laundering and counter-financing of terrorism, which actually is precisely the topic she is going to speak at length on today. Moreover, among other notable achievements, ma'am has been a teaching fellow of military and defense studies program for Australian War College at the Australian National University, and a research fellow at International and Strategic Studies at the University of Malaya. She is currently a PhD candidate at the Strategic and Defense Studies Center, the Australian National University, and has defended her thesis. It is going to be a pleasure to listen to you, ma'am. It's a pleasure to have you with us.
Thank you so much, Pranav, for the introduction. Can you hear me clearly?
Yes, ma'am, you're audible. Perfectly fine.
Okay. Before I start the screen first.
Yes, ma'am.
Wait. Oh. Yeah, I hope you can see my screen now.
Yes, ma'am. It's visible.
But I cannot see myself. Oh, wait, okay. You can see a big screen now?
Yes, ma'am.
Okay. Okay, good afternoon, everyone. And here is already evening. Thank you so much for inviting me to the guest lecture today. I'm very excited to share my knowledge to all of you guys. Thank you for the Vice Chancellor, to Mr. Vinay. Thank you for the invitation. Today, I would like to share with you about countering terrorist financing. But before I can introduce myself, like Pranav mentioned, my name is Sylvia Laksmi. I'm Indonesian, but I'm doing my PhD research here in Australia at the Australian National University. My research project is about analyzing the impact of Indonesian counter-terrorist financing policy on the social network-based terrorist financing. So today we maybe like more discussion around this topic, and I'm happy and welcome if you have any experience as well in the topic terrorist financing. So before I share my knowledge about terrorist financing, it is also good for us to have a brief information or brief knowledge about terrorism, the context of terrorism, and then after that we understand about terrorist financing. So how they become terrorists, this is very popular. Before they are willing to donate the money or they raise the funds, usually we have to know the motivation behind why they become the terrorists. There are 4 aspects of how individuals are willing to join a terrorist group. The first one, as you can see in the screen, their social groups play a critical role in the radicalization process, radicalizing social groups. It demonstrated that networks of friends or relatives were instrumental in the radicalization process. Exposure to the radicalization effect of peer on social groups can occur in any number of ways and settings, including recruitments during the gatherings. They target schools, cultural centers, universities, social clubs, and mosques. The second one, you can see the real and perceived rewards factors. Rewards mean consequences that increase the likelihood of religious behavior rewards, social status, financial rewards, friendship, and excitement. The most prominently identified reward for participation in suicide terrorism, as we all know, is martyrdom. The perceived benefits associated with a martyr's afterlife include forgiveness of the sins, access to heaven, and communion with God. This is the promise that all the terrorists try to spread and to do propaganda to the people and to the sympathizer. They promise that you have an access to heaven and the ability to guarantee access to paradise for 70 relatives or friends, and the belief that the martyr will be greeted in heaven to enjoy the sexual pleasure of 72 virgins. Nowadays, financial rewards are also popular, especially in giving assistance to the families of terrorists. The third one is the desire to respond to the grievance. This perceived grievance can be inflicted on either the individual personality or they can be inflicted on a larger collective group with whom the individual closest identifies. The last one is the desire for change. Some terrorist recruits may be motivated out of a desire to institute changes in their environment. These changes are often related to the objective of the terrorist organization or to movement they seek to join. For example, a desire for an independent state or a desire to establish caliphate. So in the case of Indonesia and most of the Southeast Asian cases, some factors are identified as push and pull factors or individual engaged in terrorism. In Indonesia specifically, first, local conflicts. There are some local communal conflicts in east of Indonesia between Christians and Muslims, and this has created a fertile environment for domestic terrorist groups in Indonesia. They spread the propaganda of feelings of solidarity among Muslim youth. The second one is the kinship ties. They inherited jihadism through blood ties, marital ties, and extended kinship through education. And these are the factors in the radicalization of Indonesian militants. The third one is prison as a venue for radicalization. Senior and low-ranking followers, they are met at prison, and in the prison provides a host of informal interaction, and they transmitted ideological ideas. This is the map of Southeast Asia militant nowadays. As you can see, there are some domestic terrorist groups, and most of them pledged their allegiance to ISIS. Now we talk about the development of ISIS. This is just a brief before we understand terrorist financing itself. The current situation shows an increase in the intensity of attacks by the ISIS group in Syria in order to show that they have still existed. The power struggle between ISIS and Al-Qaeda happened in the Western Sahel of region, like covering the borders of Mali, Nigeria, and Burkina Faso on the African continent. And this is a battleground for groups vying for control of the region between ISIS in the Greater Sahara and Al-Qaeda in the Islamic Maghreb. Since last year, there has been a surge in attacks by these groups against one another. In addition, Islamic State's West African province, which is a splinter group from Boko Haram, is still very active in carrying out attacks. Islamic State's monthly magazine, The Voice of Hind, which is aimed at supporters of ISIS in India, has been published for 5 consecutive months. The 5th issue presents arguments that convince ISIS supporters that it's justified to attack civilians and encourage exterminating the infidels' measures, including stabbing people with scissors and hammers and urging supporters to take revenge by using children to spread as much as possible the coronavirus, COVID-19. Next, in terms of communication, Telegram is the most favorite communication platform used by ISIS. The starting point of ISIS in using Telegram was on 22nd of November 2015. So you can see all this fact on the screen. And the development of the current Camp Al-Hol situation during the COVID-19 pandemic is quite alarming. The dense population constrains the level of quantity of COVID-19 testing of prisoners in the camp. It was learned at the camp that many female prisoners and their children had fled the camp by paying smugglers to facilitate their escape in recent months. If you want to see the development of foreign terrorist fighters in Indonesia, there are 3 destinations. The first one, Syria-Iraq conflict, and Philippines and Afghanistan. Now, this is also what I said before about Telegram, and then the subject that they always discuss in the Telegram platform. This is just a brief for you. So, in Indonesia and also in Southeast Asia, there are some impacts on the COVID-19 situation. The first one, Chinese sentiment. Some radical groups say that this epidemic first appeared in China as a form of divine punishment for their action against Uyghur Muslims. The existence of this assumption does not rule out the possibility of increasing the threat of terror against Chinese ethnic, especially in Indonesia. The second one, prisons. Attempts to break into prisons like the one carried out by ISIS prisoners in Hasaka, Syria on March 2019, 2020 are also part of the ISIS call in Syria. The third one, leaderless jihad. This situation also made it possible for lone wolves and leaderless jihadists to carry out the actions. Next is fundraising. In addition, institutions that focus on financial crime prevention should also be aware of the possibility of extremist fundraising efforts in the name of humanitarian assistance. The last one, the pandemic situations. The acts of terror can be triggered, especially if there is a crisis in society that causes a chaotic situation. The pandemic situation is vulnerable to chaos conditions, and terrorist groups will exploit this situation to play a role to confuse the situation. Now let's begin to talk about terrorist financing. If we talk about terrorist financing, the definition we usually adopted from the International Convention for the Suppression of the Financing of Terrorism, issued in 1999. It is about the assets of every kind. So just remember, whether tangible or intangible, movable or immovable, both in the legal documents or instruments form, like physical form or electronic or digital forms. This convention also criminalized terrorist financing under Article 2, as you can see in the screen on the screen, and then you can read by yourself on the screen how this Article 2 criminalized terrorist financing. So Based on this convention, then there is an organization called Financial Action Task Force on Money Laundering and Terrorist Financing as a reference for every countries, for every member jurisdiction in the world to adopt anti-money laundering and countering terrorist financing. So Financial Action Task Force, if ATF, formulate 3 stages of terrorist financing. The first one, the sources of fund. So terrorists usually raise their money resources from legitimate source and illegitimate source. Legitimate source means they can raise the money from misusing non-profit organizations or misusing the business, donors, and so on. And also illegitimate source, including criminal activities. And some of the case of terrorist groups, they are sponsored by states. The second one, the movement of fund. So they can move the money inside or outside financial institutions, or inside institution, including from the using the bank or legal money remittances, outside the financial industry by cash or using hawala. Some of them also in the African region, they use trade-based money laundering. The third one, how they use the fund. There are some expenses that they spend for using the money. The first one, using for operations like buying explosive materials, weapons. And then the second one is for management, like training, for military training, for spreading propaganda, recruiting people. And the third one also for social services. It's like financial supports for the families of terrorists, the families of terrorist prisoners, also widows and children. We can talk later in details about these 3 stages of terrorist financing. This is the matrix in the cases of terrorist financing networks in Indonesia from 2002 to 2019. I made this matrix during my PhD research. So why I divide it into 2 time frames? Because in 2013, we enacted the special anti-terrorist financing law. As you can see, the ways of they raise and move and use the fund is mushrooming. So still very expanding the networks and expanding the strategies. I give you one example, and this is very popular. You might know about that, Bali bombing. The main channel for moving the money is through cash courier. The purpose is, of course, for bombing in Bali. How they raise the money? They got the money from the international Al Qaeda networks. They moved the money using one minmat. This one through Thailand border, and then they went to Indonesian border, and then one minmat brought the money by cash. Besides that, the group also GI in Jemaah Islamiyah robbed the jewelry store in August 2002, and after that they tried to both the weapons and then crafted the bombs. So how they move the money? They move the money by cash and also friends to friends connection using bank transfer. How they use the money? They use the money for crafting the bombs, for by buying the chemical substances. They also use the money for buying motorcycles, and then for I think there's some money also for a rented house as meeting points. And also they also bought a car, a van, where they use as operational car, and then the suicide bomber inside the car when they exploded the bomb. And after that, they also used some money for escape, and then rented the money for escape and buying food and so on. So that's the technical expenses that they spend. Another example is Tamrin bombing. You can search in the Google. It was happened in 2016. Oman Abdurrahman and Rois were terrorist prisoners, and then they controlled the money. Adi Jihadi was the brother of Rois, and he visited Rois very often. So Adi Jihadi then controlled the money outside the prisons. They used the money for military training. I can show you the next slide. This is how the investigators track the money. Some of them in Indonesian language. I apologize for that. But unfortunately, we could make this diagram after the incidents in that time. So how they use the money, very small, transportation for military training, for arms, for weapons, and also yeah, I think that one, for military training and weapons. And the red side, this is how they withdraw the money. They withdraw the money by cash through ATMs, and they use the ATM cards of foreign terrorist fighters who already left Indonesia to Syria. Another case in terrorist financing nowadays is related of women, how women also played important roles in terrorist financing. Previous observations on terrorist cases revealed the four types of motivations of women who join a terrorist group. First, they join a terrorist group to support their husbands, who play an important role in these groups. Marriage alliances, including in Indonesia, were the most strategic way to impart the fundamental ideology to family members. Two ISIS brides whom ISIS fighters married revealed a related motivation about this. Even if their husband was killed in the battle, they felt proud of their husband's accomplishment and never spoke any word of grief or sadness. The community also glorified them. They will be honored among the community. The second motivation is the bonding among women fighters through friendship. Like their friends, female terrorists were also encouraged by the social connection they had developed among their peers. They could develop this connection through social interactions or in campus, or as relatives of activists, and even their co-involvement in the crimes. The third motivation is self-actualization against saturated feelings and grievance. This sensation emerged as they attempted to find a way of socio-economic inequality, psychosocial issues related to unfortunate life experiences like losing a loved one, or patriarchal authority, domestic violence, or the dishonor of being raped. Lastly, a strong desire for female emancipation also becomes a critical motivation for women who strongly envision themselves as terrorist fighters or terrorist group supporters. At the global level, we discovered that the attraction came from their independence from parental control and Western operations. In the Indonesian cases and also in the Southeast Asian, I investigated three prominent roles of female terrorists: instrumental support, operational support, and organizational support. Instrumental support was identified when the women provide tangible matters of services, including funds, fighters, materials, or shelters. Operational support consists of the skill to prepare and execute an attack, including making a bomb or explosives, or also as a suicide bombers. Lastly, organizational support. It includes the efforts of women in contributing to the organizations in terms of providing socio-cognitive and interpersonal aspects of network expansion, recruitment, propaganda, and spreading the exchanges of ideas and access to information. I give you some case studies. The first case is Jumiatun, or we call her as Umi Delima. She is the wife of Santoso, who was a prominent former leader of Mujahidin Indonesia Timur. It's a big network of homegrown terrorism in Indonesia. Not much information about her actions was revealed in the investigation report because the questions were mainly related to the husband's activities. However, in relation to the terrorist financing aspect, some facts were also not further examined yet, such as her knowledge about the long battle or weapon stocks or bombs, the international money transfer related with the Abu Sayyaf group, or even the information of a bundle of money that she received during the military training. Another example is Rosmawati, the second case studies, who was convicted of terrorist financing crime because her involvement in the fundraising activities for operations and logistics. She is the wife of Hassan, an active member of Santoso's network as well. She organized the fundraising through members of the terrorist group, and she used the money for operations and logistics, including support for the widows, the wives of jihadis and terrorist prisoners. The third one is Agustin Ningsi. She attended a research group, and then she pledged allegiance to ISIS in Syria. She sold her house and properties to finance her travel to Syria. Not only that, she also initiated meetings and organized travel of other women fighters, including buying their passports, visas, the flight tickets, and also the accommodations. Now we go to the discussion about terrorist financing in charities. They misuse the charities for three purposes, like raise and divert funds, provide logistic and support, and also recruitment and operations. There are some factors why they like to use charities. The first one, public trust, because we know charities organization, they have access to considerable sources of funds and maybe cash rich, so they have the public trust. The second one, they have branches or presence in multiple jurisdictions that provides a well-established infrastructure for cross-border operations and financial transactions. The third one, the operations of non-profit organizations or charities can be located near areas exposed to terrorist activities. The last one is the involvement of some charities in humanitarian or developmental projects also leave them open to abuse, as it is harder to disentangle the sources and the flows of money to the end users, whether for illegitimate or legitimate purposes. So that's the challenges from the government or authorities to examine the suspicious transaction related to terrorism and to charities. I give you the picture that this was happened, I think, few months ago, where the police officers in Indonesia captured some members of Jamaah Islamiyah, the biggest terror network in Indonesia, and they captured some 20,000 boxes. It's a charity boxes. They put in the small supermarket. And then they use the money as a cover using a foundation, Islamic charity foundations, and then use the money for the group. Now we move to the topic of internet and terrorist financing. How they use internet to support the terrorist group and to support the terrorist financing. The first one, like in the picture in the screen, they use internet for propaganda and recruitment, to recruit more people. So they put all the narratives in the internet, in the social media. Besides to recruit the member, they also use the narratives on the Facebook or their social medias to counter the government, the policies. So to create distrust from the society, so they don't support the government. So this is the start how they influence people in the community, and then after that, after the community believe on them, and then they will follow these groups. That's the strategy. Another one, they use also social media for fundraising, using the Telegram closed groups or using Facebook, Instagram, and so on. Some of them also using Twitter. I give you an example. In Southeast Asia, we have Bahru Naim, an early proponent of using cryptocurrency for terrorist financing, was Bahru Naim. He was an Indonesian ISIS fighter based in Syria, but he was killed. He had used online payment services such as PayPal and Bitcoin to transfer money to his comrades back home to fund terrorist activities. In his online manual, published in 2016, Bahru Naim listed Bitcoin as one of the fund-moving methods to launder the proceeds from carding. Carding means fraudulent credit card transactions. The investigators believe that Bahru Naim was directed the funds to domestic terror cells across Indonesia. We also had a case named using Abu Ahmed Foundation. It is an Indonesian-based jihadist aligned fundraising group, founding and led by Tasnim Miriam Saila, a widow of Indonesian fighters named Abu Ahmed al-Indonesi, who was killed in 2015 fighting alongside the Al-Qaeda-linked Hayat Tahrir al-Sham, HTS, or we can call it as part of Jabhat al-Nusra, one of the entities listed in the UN Security Council Resolution 1267. Open source research uncovered that Abu Ahmed Foundation had publicly advertised link to Malhama Tactical, a private military company known to train jihadis in Syria. Muslimah Bima Peduli Mama Charity is known to collect donations mainly from people in Indonesia. It claims that all donated funds are used to benefit people who are affected by natural disasters in Indonesia and affected by conflict war in Palestine and Syria. An account linked with this charity was used for the campaign of Abu Ahmed Foundation and Malhama Tactical. It was advertised that donations would fund the purchase of airsoft rifles, presumably to help train Indonesian fighters training with Malhama Tactical. Open source analysis also identified that the Abu Ahmed Foundation financed military uniforms for Al-Sodako, likely through cryptocurrency. Details of the donation was published on Twitter in a call for Bitcoin donations to Al-Sodako. Now we talk about the entire money laundering and countering financing of terrorism regime. As we all know, we adopted the recommendations provided by FATF, Financial Action Task Force on Money Laundering and Terrorist Financing. They have 9 regional bodies, and Indonesia and Southeast Asia included in Asia Pacific Group on Money Laundering. I think India also. It is based in Sydney. There are some modification on the recommendations. The early establishment of FATF, they published 40 recommendations, and then they move into 40 recommendation plus 9. 9 means 9 special recommendations for anti-terrorist financing. And then after that, they modified again into 40 recommendations, but already combined money laundering and terrorist financing. And then they added nowadays with the financing of nuclear proliferation. If AT have some standards of evaluation, self-reporting, mutual evaluation review, which is the peer evaluated by peer countries. Indonesia has undertook, I think, 2 mutual evaluation. We had 2 mutual evaluation report and blacklisting mechanism. Indonesia was under blacklist on 2002 and also under the FATF public statement in 2012. That's why we issued a special law in anti-terrorist financing in 2013. This is the chart how global and national responses to anti-money laundering and counter-financing of terrorism. As I said, the orange side is from the international policies. And then in Indonesia, we have a national commission of that. And then under that, PPATK is the Indonesian Financial Intelligence Unit. We work together with stakeholders, means financial industries. And then we protect together the financial system integrity to create economic stability. In terms of the implementation, mutual evaluation review were conducted twice to review the compliance of Indonesia to the Financial Action Task Force recommendations. They review the policy output and policy outcomes. So my PhD research complement this evaluation framework, because I propose impact analysis framework, which is to see how the development of counter-financing of terrorism policies in Indonesia really impact on the crime, disrupting, decreasing, or it's just a matter of compliance to the to the FATF recommendations. Next, Indonesian government also, I think India also do the same thing. We publish a national risk assessment on terrorist financing. So we had a look at the domestic risk, by, as I said, always related about how they raise the money, how they use the money, how they move the money. And then we also map the geographic area, which area is like becoming hotspots, and what kind of financial sectors that they have been using to channel their money. In the regional and international level, we have been trying very hard to apply financial intelligence approach. So we work together with Southeast Asian Financial Intelligence Units, plus Australia and New Zealand. We do collaboration practices like in intelligence information exchanges. And we have some forum called as Financial Intelligence Consultative Group. We conduct now biannual counter-financing terrorist summit with Southeast Asian Financial Intelligence Unit and also with Australia and New Zealand. And then we develop public-private partnerships. In Indonesia, they just launched a terrorist financing platform. In Australia, they have terrorist Fintel Alliance. So the public organization, including government, law enforcement, intelligence agency, they work together, sit together with the public sectors, financial industries, and then they exchange the information in timely manner. So because the timeliness is very important, because the spirit is we want to prevent rather than we want to combat after the incident. So we want to prevent the incidents happen. The emerging threats of terrorist financing in Indonesia, we have terrorist financing committed by corporation, illicit drugs, crypto assets, and peer-to-peer lending. This is the fintech area that we have to address the risk in the future. During pandemic, as you can see in the slide, there are some problems because like the remote working environment. So, and then the increasing use of online platform, everything goes to online. So there are some changes in the criminal modus operandi, and then mostly about digital. So the threats occurred during COVID-19 pandemic is mostly about the escalation of fraud. So this is not only terrorist financing, but also money laundering. So the first one, impersonation of officials. The group committed by retrieving customer data information, for example, impersonating a hospital employee who asked for a sum of money for treatment. The second one, counterfeit good, medical equipment, drugs, vaccines, and COVID tests, and a lot of them. There are increasing demands for medical goods accompanied by increasing in online sales fraud. But the counterfeit goods or goods not delivered. The third one is fundraising for fake donation. The criminals sending emails or advertisement for donation as if they were international organizations or foundations or non-profit organizations engaged in COVID-19 assistance. The last one is the fraudulent investment, the investment scheme offering products for treating COVID-19, like the medicine, herbal medicine, and vitamin supplement from overseas or something like that. Besides that, the cybercrime are also increasing. The first one, the problem of email and SMS phishing. The criminals take advantage of public attention to COVID-19 by sending emails or short messaging system on behalf of WHO to persuade people to click on the links or attachments, and it contains viruses so as to gain access to user usernames and passwords. The second one, business email compromise, a type of email cybercrime scam in which an attacker targets a business to defraud the company. Major types of business email compromise are CEO fraud, account compromise, false invoice scheme, data theft, or etc. The last one is ransomware attack. The criminals use website and mobile applications that seem to share information about COVID-19, but contains viruses to access the victim's gadget and make payments. Now, we talk a lot about terrorist financing. We now examine the challenges in preventing and combating terrorist financing. The first one is comprehensive risk assessment or national agency level. It's very important because that's the way we can mitigate the future risk of terrorist financing. As I already mentioned before, how the national risk assessment work in Indonesia. The second one, social media link with cryptocurrencies. So as I said before about the digital payment, fintech are also vulnerable, including the social media service users, because a lot of terrorist group now building their system in the social media, and they want to, especially for crowdfunding. The third one is the jurisdiction. When they try to exchange the information, every jurisdiction, they have different capabilities in providing completed information in terms of identification of terrorist financing networks, of terrorist group, and so on. Charities as a cover, and we also talk a lot with the nexus between charities and terrorist financing, including the use of fund for supporting the families and terrorist inmates. It's very hard because it's not necessarily directed to people buying explosive materials or chemical substances, but just they want to support to their families because they want to sustain the organization and the networks. Therefore, there is an urgent need to centralize the monitoring and control of domestic and foreign non-profit organizations, not only in Indonesia, but also in other countries, and especially in Southeast Asia. Legitimate funding opportunities. There are some cases found in Indonesia. They use a business as a media for funding, for raising money to take profits from there, or to mingle the money. The money for terrorist activities, they mingle in one account where they also use the account for running their business. The business could be herbal, like herbal medicine, Muslim fashions, online selling, or like the digital selling, like phones and handphones and so on. And the problem also come from the returnees. The return of foreign terrorist fighters is still very hard to control them, to supervise them. The other challenges is considering the fact of more than 500,000 migrants from Indonesia work in several countries, including Hong Kong, Taiwan, Singapore, Korea, and also Middle East. Their marriages with jihadis and the use social network platform enable them to support the groups financially and more resourceful than others. So therefore, there is a big need on building a unified data center platform on terrorist financing, which consists of citizenship database, analysis of terrorism actions, and terrorist financing. So this platform could be used for information exchanges between law enforcement agencies, private sectors, and also intelligence agencies. I think, yep. Yes, I think that's all from me. Thank you for listening. I'm welcome for Q&A session. Thank you.
Ma'am, I had a couple of questions.
Yeah.
Ma'am, in the section of women supporting the terrorists and how they support the financing, ma'am, whatever research, the little research that I have done, in most war-torn countries or where conflicts are occurring, it's the women who are the victims of terrorism. Like you mentioned a point about the wives or the women being proud of their husbands and them taking arms to defend them or carry what they had started. But in places like Yemen, where uh, the world's worst humanitarian crisis has hit Yemen, and it's a major war-torn country. Sort of there, women are taking up arms or taking guns to defend themselves. Like there's a separate militia and there's a separate group formed by them, not to defend their husbands but to defend themselves. So the point that you mentioned, what is the percentage of women who try to defend their husbands or are proud of their family being associated to terrorists or being terrorists?
Yeah, I understand there are two perspectives on seeing women in terms of terrorism studies. The first one, people saying women are vulnerable, but in my case here, I want to show you to demonstrate that women is not that vulnerable. There are also some women, like this is our proof in Indonesia, and some of the incidents, women was they are controlling the organizations. For example, because usually people already knows terrorists are men, so people mostly suspected men are the terrorists, but they need someone behind to do underground network, especially to recruit more people. So that's why in Indonesian cases, and I think Southeast Asian as well, or you can make it as a case study in India. Try to find, because the investigation also found some of the women was the holder of the account that channeling the money for terrorists. In my experience in Indonesia, there are no accounts on behalf of the terrorists itself. They never have opened the account, but their wives, their children, they use that kind of accounts. So we had like some accounts of a very like teenagers, but then when they know it is teenager controlled by someone else. So that's the case in Indonesia. But unfortunately, some of the investigators might see women, oh, she's vulnerable, should be she just supporting the husband. But actually, in the case that I present, she was also prominent in the terrorist group. Then people never wonder. Uh, Women is not never can do it. Can do that kind of activities. You can search the Surabaya bombing in Indonesia, conducted, initiated by the wives. So the wives gathered together, like three wives from the three families. They always gather together. They planned the attack alongside with the husbands, and then they imparted the values and the ideologies to the children. So they did homeschooling for their children, but by the time, like during the like in the daily activities, they usually perform like give gave the children to watch the videos. That's the videos like war in Syria. They try to transmit the ideology. So women play, that's why I say women play an important role. Some of the cases also in Indonesia, because I cannot present all the cases here, it could be very long. They actively saying, I want to be suicide bombers. So that's the transformation, how women then from vulnerable becoming prominent. So that's why I said this is the other side of women. I'm doing this research actually now. Maybe it will be finished in the next few months, especially the roles of the women's in terrorist financing in three countries. So I try to link, because the money, even money transfer from Indonesia to Philippines to smuggled weapons, the accounts that use in the Philippines, all women account. So that's, we have to know, like this is the new development in gender studies. So they are not about the emancipation and so on. Yes, in terms of ideology, they are controlled or submissive to the husbands. But in terms of the money, they are brave enough to also they take role in the terrorism networks. Yeah.
Right. And ma'am, there was one more question that I wanted to ask. In one of the slides, which talked about challenges in countering financing, there was this section that was dedicated to charities being used as cover-ups for financing. But ma'am, in the case of say Iran and Hezbollah, the funding by Iran to that particular organization is so apparent that they don't even try to use cover-ups, or they try to hide what their intentions are. So in such cases where the funding and the motives are so apparent, how does one sort of control it?
If it is very apparent, so it's very good for the investigators to arrest. But the challenge I said, because most of the non-profit organization, they will not openly saying this is money for this terrorist group, because they know the bank will ban them and blacklist it. If they are already under blacklist, like you can search a UN resolution 1267 and 1373 related of the Al Qaeda, Taliban organizations, and also domestic list of terrorist group. If they are already under these three types of domestic terrorist lists, the not the yeah, the country, the government should freezing the assets. So then in as far as I know, is except the country also sponsored the terrorist group itself, they never very open saying this is for ISIS, because the government suddenly shut down the the terrorist assets. So they cannot do anything, because once the asset are frozen, they cannot use it for anything. That's the problem. So what I observe in terms of charities organization, they always use charities, humanitarian disasters, natural disasters, and try to do crowdfunding from the community. The problem is usually they never use the corporate accounts. They always use the individual account, like in on the name on behalf of the treasurer or on behalf of the leader. And another case is also some cases also like this, the chairman, not the terrorist itself, but people behind the organization, like the advisor, board of advisor, or the beneficial owner of the charities foundation are part of the terrorist group. So then, and then after that, they never withdraw the money or transfer the money to buy explosive directly. Never. They usually withdraw the money by cash, and after that, or some of them just channeling to the families, because this is the way they can make the organization sustainable. So building the new generation who also devoted themselves to the terrorist groups, because they know the fathers usually arrested by the government, by the police, and then who is the breadwinner? They don't have anyone, and the government, because if it is only 5 to 10 terrorists arrested, like in Singapore, they are able to afford and then give support for the families. But in my country, more than 200 terrorists arrested. How can the government's budget can cover that? So that's an opportunity. It's a very good opportunity for terrorist group to support them. So in the future, when the children already bigger, they know my government doesn't help me, but this group helped me. So after that, they devoted themselves again to the terrorist group after their father died or something like that. That's the problem and challenges. So I said in my slide, the government should centralize the supervisory and monitor body for all the charities commission.
Yes, ma'am. Thank you so much.
Yeah, is there anyone want to ask?
Yes, ma'am. I have one question,
Yeah.
and there are a few questions in the chat box too.
Oh, okay.
We'll direct it to you, ma'am. Just tell me, uh, how deeply Islamic banking is connected with the financing terrorism. Is there any connection at all? And if there is, how deep is it?
The use of the misuse of Islamic banking for terrorist financing.
Yes, ma'am. Yes, ma'am.
Uh, in my observation, usually they don't see or they don't choose this is Islamic banking or conventional banking, but usually they use banks that the system is not very good, so the data is very hard to withdraw by the government, or they use banking in a rural area because usually they never like they live in the city. They some of them most of them also use bank um, who also link with international banks because they want to channel the money from overseas or from here to overseas. So there are no specific or they their favorite is using Islamic banking. No, it's like they just try to find every opportunity to use financial service providers. If they can do it cash, they will do it cash because there is no track. So that's why it's very, very popular now. They use the illegal money remittances like that. So you might know about hawala. It's very hard to regulate, but this is how they try to see every uh, every chance to finance the terrorist organizations. Yeah, I see here some questions. How one person can be termed defined as terrorist as we don't have proper definition for terrorist and terrorism. Uh, we the investigation of terrorism always refer to the law. So every country should be have terrorism law, and there is definition of terrorism in there. In terms of terrorist financing, uh, adopted also from international recommendation, it's not only money already been used for buying materials or already exploded. Then that's terrorist financing. No, it's also money used for preparing the attacks and money used for social services because that's also already linked, or money they use for preparing the travel to Syria or other countries. That's the definition of terrorist and terrorism actually referred to the law because that's the way the investigator can criminalize the terrorist financier and terrorist group. And then how trust play role in terrorist finance? They could not be regulated by corporate regulation. How do you mean trust? Saurabh, can you explain to me what your question is?
Yes, ma'am. Actually, I'm asking the about the trust formed for a like a charitable or religious purpose that cannot be regulated by any company regulation, like shell companies. This shell companies can be regulated by the corporate regulation, but on the other hand, the trust formation is like the scene where the money can be untraceable by the authorities. Yeah, that's my question.
You mean individual to individual?
Not individual. It's like a trust of like in India. It's a trust like a in temple we have trust in uh,
Oh,
and in for religious purpose or any charitable purpose that they organize a trust and uh, for that they organize a group of people and form the trust for that purpose. Yeah, that's
yeah. Actually, even like the church or mosque, usually under the because they should have a legal paper that they establish that, and then they mention about the activities. Actually, trust is one of the activities under that kind of organization. That's also the weakness from the government because if they say that they have to monitor the non-profit organization, because non-profit organizations not only charities but also education organizations like madrasa, madrasa, the Islamic boarding school, Christian boarding school. They're also part of non-profit organization, and also like church or religious institution, they're also part of that. If it is related the international transactions, in Indonesia and some countries in the world, they have international fund transfer instructions. So every individual in Indonesia and Australia, they have zero threshold. So every single money coming in and coming and going out, they have the reports. Even you buy something in eBay or Amazon, they have the reports. So it's much easier. But if the transaction conducted in the domestic, in national level, so it's very important from the financial institutions. They have to strengthen the red flags or indicators to detect suspicious transactions related to terrorist groups. So that's why we actively educate and update their knowledge in terrorist financing, because they are the frontliners in preventing terrorist financing and also other financial crimes. Is that what you mean, Sora?
Yes, ma'am. Yes, ma'am. Actually, I'm somewhere read that trust need not to be registered, so I just asked this question because that then poses challenge for.
I
Okay,
can't
okay,
hear you
that's
properly.
clear. Yeah, that's clear.
Okay, thank you. More than residing. It's a lot of question. Wait. Regarding the Al-Hol refugee camp in Kurdistan, it is said that more 100,000 people residing ever since ISIS conclusive defeat, but this camp is also breeding ground of future. How would you suggest it shall be dealt with, keeping the view of 2 to 3 of the population consists of children? Does financing channels of terrorism zone come into play, or any other humanitarian will be stepping into the picture? Yeah, as I said before, there are a lot of more about the financing into humanitarian organization for the camp, because people can cover, like one of the case that I mentioned in Abu Ahmed Foundation. It is international organizations, and they try to cover the money for helping refugee and people in Syria and Pakistan, in Afghanistan. So yeah, the humanitarian would be the first top cover for channeling money to this camp. How far contemporary psychological research on terrorism effective or can be effective, if at all, in reducing the sorry, Sif Priya, do you mean by the radicalization or disengagement program by the government?
Yes, ma'am. Hello?
Yep.
Yes,
How
ma'am.
far? Yeah, how far is effective or can be effective? Uh, I agree with you. Like this the radicalization or disengagement is very important, especially for returnees and also for the terrorist prisoners that they already been released from the prisons. It is very important because we have to we have to disengage them from the group. So it's not only the radicalization, it's not only the communication, how to make them support the government, but it's also how to make them capable to be disengaged with the terrorist group. I believe they still engage because of the financial incentive that the terrorist group can maintain for them. Like, look, now everything is very hard, very difficult, especially during pandemic. That's why the government not only give them like money, for example, for them, but it is very important to give them to build their capacity and skills, and then prepare them to join the community again. So we run some program, and we have the PCVE, preventing countering violent extremism uh, uh, framework in Indonesia, and we work together with the civil society organizations in Indonesia and across Southeast Asia, because the government cannot do this by themselves. We have one organization, National Counterterrorism Agency, but they have to work with a civil society organization to prepare this framework, because this is very important. But in the other side, they have also, in my perspective, they have to monitor the money flows, the financial flows among these groups, even they already release. Because we have some cases the recidivists join again terrorist group. So that's the problem. I don't know effective or can be effective if it is like answering your question or not, Sif Priya.
Yes, ma'am.
Okay,
In
cool.
a way, yes. Thank you.
Yep, welcome. Is there anyone who wants to ask questions anymore? How about the time, Vinay? Still have time?
Ma'am, if I think there's just one more question, and after that we can stop the session.
Oh, there is one more question here on the chatting group. Can you please
Yes,
tell
ma'am.
us about how the situation or terrorist financing the Taliban changes after its takeover of Afghanistan? National U.S. has blocked Afghanistan, so I need to will be directly financing the Taliban itself. Can we categorize this as a terrorist financing? Yeah, you have to remember Taliban also a political entity. I cannot say anything to predict having predictions because uh, this is still happening. But there are some potential and opportunity for the terrorist group in Indonesia. Could be like this situation create a dynamic in the extremist group in Indonesia as well because we afraid the terrorist group or the extremist radical groups in Indonesia glorified the winning of Taliban in take over the government. So they might use this narrative, not directly, but they create the narratives. Look, specific organization can also take over the overall government. If they can do it, we also can do it here. That's the worry from the government how they glorify the Taliban. Taliban also have some variation on their terrorist financing, on their financing, like from especially from illicit drugs, real estate tax, and so on. So I think the worry from the government is how they created the narrative and also how they can use this narrative to do fundraising for people in Afghanistan. Again, they use every single narrative to get the money and show to the community as if they care to Afghanistan because of this. So that's also possible. But I cannot say a lot about how the financing from US or China because it's still going on. But I believe it's very hard for them to stop the financings from the opium because it's very big until now, and then it's the major financial resources of the Taliban.
Thank you so much, ma'am.
Yeah, yeah,
Uh,
Pranab. I
Ma'am, now
agree.
I would like to invite Ashwin to propose the vote of thanks. Ashwin.
Uh, Ma'am, I would like to take this opportunity to thank you for taking your time from your busy schedule and shedding the light on this thought-provoking topic. I know this is not very ideal time for you to deliver a lecture, but you still managed to be here for us.
Yeah,
We are really thankful for that. For that, I would like to thank Honorable Vice Chancellor Sir, the faculty members, and non-teaching members, especially the IT department for their support. Ma'am, it was pleasure listening to you speaking, and this forum looks forward to collaborating with you
yeah.
for our future endeavors. Thank you, ma'am.
Thank you. You're welcome for the invite. For the invite for me, I'm happy to share because I'm also a student and you are a student, so we are same. Yeah. Thank you for organizing the forum and also for Finai for inviting me. Thank you so much.
Thank you, ma'am. Thank you.
Thank you, ma'am.
Okay. I'll see you again sometimes in the near future. See ya.
Bye, ma'am.
Bye, ma'am. People can leave the meeting.